Hey guys, it's Miss J. So I just wanted to cover the information that you all learned this past week over freedom of expression and hit the main idea so that way if you have any questions you can go back through and watch this. And then as usual there will be a review guide that you need to fill out with the things you understood and the things you still need help with. And make sure you're detailed in that as well. So, like I said, we're looking at the First Amendment. So starting off, I wanted to read you guys the First Amendment just so you could see the true wording of it. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So we're going to go over that and see more in depth about what that means, and then your assignments this week will cover the rest that is not covered this past week. So starting off, we are just looking over overall the freedom of expression. And so there's many components to that which you covered in this past week through Mr. V's Google site. So I wanted to kind of cover those and go over them so you could have a better understanding. Starting off with censorship. So censorship is the prohibition of certain words or phrases from news, television, books, public broadcast, etc. And it's because they're viewed as obscene or as a threat. So that's how you think of like television. They're not allowed to say certain things. It's called censoring. They take out certain bad words or certain topics that are not what is deemed appropriate for like the general viewing. So you looked at a case that was really important. It was the case of FCC versus Pacifica Foundation, and the FCC is the Federal Communications Division. And so what happened in this was this news station that was owned by Pacifica Foundation called WBAI played a monologue from a stand-up comedian named George Carlin, and George Carlin's monologue was his 7 dirty words monologue. So he was covering the words that were not appropriate to say on television or on radio, and it was just kind of an ironic sort of monologue that he was giving. So WBAI played it over the radio station, and then there was a complaint sent in against the news station to the FCC that they were playing this inappropriate broadcast. And so the FCC just sent a letter to the Pacifica Foundation. They didn't get in trouble the first time, and they said that if they played stuff like that again, then they would have charges brought against them. Pacifica Foundation, however, didn't like that, so they took the FCC to the D.C. Court of Appeals. And the D.C. Court of Appeals ruled in favor of the Pacifica Foundation. So they said due to like the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression, WBAI could play this monologue. However, then in 1978, this case went to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the FCC. So they ruled that this program was indecent and played during a time that children would be listening. So this was important because it set the precedent, which is a ruling that would be applied in the future, that the FCC could regulate offensive content aired between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. So they said since children would be listening during that time, it is not appropriate and it would be a violation of people's rights to hear that sort of thing. So the FCC could say that they were not allowed to play that. So that just kind of increased the censorship rules and what the government agencies could regulate through this case. And then next off, you guys looked at symbolic speech. So symbolic speech is like the nonverbal communication that is used in order to promote certain ideas or beliefs. So people aren't necessarily actually saying something, but they're showing something, or they're doing some sort of action that is still getting their message across. And symbolic speech is still protected under the First Amendment. However, just like everything else, there are still some regulations to symbolic speech. And some examples of symbolic speech would be wearing certain armbands or silently protesting or flag burning. And flag burning is one of the cases that you all looked at. So the case of Texas versus Johnson ruled that flag burning is protected under the First Amendment. However, it did make sure to clarify that while it is protected under the First Amendment, symbols that would incite or promote violence is still prohibited. But as long as they are not enticing people to violence, then they have the right to burn the flag under the First Amendment. And then we also looked at United States versus Bryan. And this was important because it kind of showed like how the government can kind of go through to see if they can regulate symbolic speech. So in the United States versus Bryan, David O'Brien burned his draft card on the steps of the South Boston courthouse. A draft card was something that was used up through the Vietnam War, and it was saying that like you have to go to war for your country. And a lot of people opposed the war, and David O'Brien was one of them, so he burned his draft card. And then he was arrested, and the Supreme Court ended up ruling that government regulation is justified if the regulation fits within this 4 criteria. So the 4 criteria was that is within the constitutional power of the government was number 1. Number 2, it furthers an important or substantial government interest. Number 3 is the government interest is unrelated to the suppression of free expression. So the government was trying, so those two kind of go together because the government was trying to get people to support this war, to go to war. And that was seen as the government interest that was important. Going to war was not limiting people's free expression. That's not why we went to war. So the government could regulate acts such as these. And then number 4, the incident restricted on an alleged First Amendment freedom is no greater than the essential to the furtherance of that interest. So if they can prove that the interest of the government actions is more essential, then they can again regulate it. So just looking at it again, this is a different way that people can get their ideas of free speech across. They can get their their ideas or beliefs, but it's just a different way to promote it. However, it's important to point out that there is still some regulation with it. And then we can look at actions. Actions are really big in the media, and you see a lot of them. It's kind of what gains a lot of attention. So you guys got to look at Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem, and Colin Kaepernick was protesting police brutality. And that kind of raised the question, could he use his right to free speech while he was working? Because as an athlete, playing sports is his job, showing up to the game is his job, and he was using his platform through his job to protest police brutality through his actions. So that kind of raised the conversation about that. And then March for Our Lives, so that is the march that goes on that raises awareness for gun violence in school. And it was really big because students walked out during it. So again, that made the question arise, can students partake in these actions to stand up for what they believe in during school hours? And there's been a lot of awareness raised through that march. And then lastly, you guys also got to watch the eulogy of Muhammad Ali by Billy Crystal. And that just kind of shows while he was sitting there talking about this important American figure, he also touched on many different political things that were going on at the time, such as the Vietnam War, civil rights, religious freedoms. And so just using his platform as a comedian, but somebody who got this platform, unfortunately, due to the death of Muhammad Ali, he used it to also talk about some political actions as well. So again, those are the ones that you guys see a lot in the news. And it's just another way that people can use their voice and use their freedom of free speech and expression. And then we looked at court limitations. And this is really important to you guys because it's talking about free speech in school. And you looked at a couple cases of that. So the first one you looked at was the Tinker versus Des Moines. And so this was back during the Vietnam War. And like I said earlier, there was quite a good majority of people who did not support the Vietnam War. So there was a group of students that decided to wear black armbands and protested the Vietnam War. The principal said that they would be suspended until they would not wear these armbands anymore. Well, the students end up suing the school for their right to free speech to be able to wear these armbands and protest of the war. And then it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that students had the right to free speech as long as it was disruptive or not enticing anything in the school. So they said that even in the school setting, like, the students still had the right to share their beliefs, show what they believed in, as long as it was not disrupting others. And then that kind of plays into the Morse versus Frederick case. So this was the one that was bong hits for Jesus. So this student Frederick was suspended after carrying a sign called "Bong Hits for Jesus" at a parade for the Olympic relay team. This was up in Juneau, Alaska. So Frederick's school kind of like took a field trip to watch this parade. And while they were there, Frederick and some of his friends held up this sign. Well, it turns out that Frederick claimed he didn't go to school that day, so he was not at a school-sponsored event. However, the principal still told him that he was not allowed to carry that sign and took it away from him, and then suspended him for promoting drug abuse or drug use. It ended up getting all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ended up ruling that the ruling in favor of the school. The Supreme Court said that the school has the right to restrict speech at school-sponsored events if they promote drug use. So Frederick tried to claim the right to free speech, stating Tinker versus Des Moines that students can promote their ideas, but the Supreme Court said that not if it's promoting drug abuse. And that even though it wasn't happening in school, it still happened at a school-sponsored event, so the school had the right to stop it. So a big question that has come up is, how has free speech changed for students with the rise of technology? So you guys are seeing this a lot. What can the school regulate on your own personal devices over the internet if it's not happening at school? So that's a big question that's coming up now, and it's being debated as well. So then kind of going into one of the changes with the internet is net neutrality. So the idea of net neutrality is that all content will be treated equally by internet providers. So the examples they gave would be that, let's say you want to order pizza, and you are on your computer and you've got Verizon internet, and Pizza Hut pays Verizon to make their website go faster. And Donato's did not pay Verizon that. So you're looking up like ordering pizza. Well, you try to go to the Donato's website and it's so slow and you can't get the phone number and it's just not working. So then you end up at the Pizza Hut website and it comes right through. So you're like, this is great. This is where I'm ordering it from. Well, that's not the idea that all content is being treated equally. It's supposed to be that you look anything up, it all comes through equally in the same amount of time. So this used to be regulated under the FCC, and it was to make sure that the internet providers followed this. And remember that the FCC showed up earlier, and so they're just, kind of. However, the FCC ended up with a new chairman, and this is Ajit Pai, and he ended the FCC's regulation of net neutrality. He believed in less government regulation. However, that brought about the fear that the internet providers would be able to do things like slow down certain sites or not provide everyone the same level of content or speed throughout all different sites. So that was just something that was concerning to the idea of free speech and freedom of access of all of that over the internet. And so then the final thoughts of all of this was, you asked the question if hate speech is allowed in the United States, and you got to look at different videos and articles about the Westboro Baptist Church. And so you kind of had to think through all of this. Yes, we have the freedom of speech, and it is a right that we have, but it is not without its limitations. And you have to kind of think for yourself and judge, like, what are these limits and how far should they go? Should we have more limitations? Does these regulations kind of allow the government to regulate things like the hate speech that is given, or the hate speech, or is that something that should be allowed under the First Amendment, freedom of speech? So just think about that. It's a good way to be an informed citizen, knowing all that you are allowed to do, not allowed to do. But if you have any questions about anything, please reach out to Mr. Ficker, myself, or Mr. V. Any of us would be happy to help you go over any of these thoughts, and if you need help covering any more of these topics.